Walter Drummond had mucked out elephant stalls in driving rain, in a Kansas hailstorm, and once in a dust storm that turned the whole lot the color of a bruise. But he had never watched a person stand so still in ankle-deep mud while a man half her patience told her she didn't belong somewhere she had every right to be. It was just past 6, the lot lights humming on over Caro Brothers Circus, the cookhouse smell of fried bread drifting past the animal compound gate, when Curtis Renner planted himself in front of a woman holding out a laminated credential like it was something he'd seen counterfeited 100 times. "Anybody can print one of these," Curtis said, not really looking at it. "We've had protesters try this exact card before." "I'm not a protester." Her voice didn't rise. "I'm Dr. Adeja Holloway. I'm the compliance veterinarian assigned to this circuit by the State Agricultural Board. My office called ahead Tuesday and left routing details for tonight's visit. Nobody told me anything." Curtis didn't move out of the gate's narrow gap. Behind him, the cat trailers ticked as they cooled, and somewhere past the big top, a calliope wheezed through its evening loop, oblivious to all of it. "Wait by the ticket booth. I'll see if anybody knows what you're talking about." She didn't go to the ticket booth. She stood where she was, satchel over one shoulder, and opened a small notebook and wrote something down. Walter, forking hay 20 feet off, watched her note the time. Then a man in a windbreaker came up from the parking lot, flashed a business card Walter recognized as belonging to the circuit's insurance carrier, and Curtis waved him through the gate without so much as a glance at it. That was the part Walter couldn't put down later. Not the mud, not the cold coming on, but the easy way for the man and the flat refusal for her. 10 feet apart, 5 minutes apart, same gate, same steward. He set his fork against the fence rail. 22 years on this lot had taught him exactly 2 things. The elephants told you the truth before the people usually got around to it. And Curtis Renner had been hired 3 seasons back because he was cheap, not because he had sense. "Curtis." Walter came over slow, the way you came up on an animal you didn't want spooked. "You know who that is?" "I know who she says she is. She said it twice now." "You call the office." Curtis's jaw worked. "I'm handling it." Walter looked past him. The woman hadn't moved, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't shifted her weight from one boot to the other the way most people did standing in cold mud for any length of time. She glanced up once, met his eyes, gave him the smallest nod, not asking for help, just acknowledging that he was there, and went back to her notebook. He'd seen show people swindled by towns, by carnies, by their own kin. He had never quite seen anybody refuse to be moved with this little fuss about it, and it unsettled him worse than shouting would have. "I'm going to find Roy," Walter said. "Don't need to drag Roy into a credential dispute." "It ain't a dispute if she's right," Walter said, and walked off toward the office trailer before Curtis could find an answer to that. He didn't run. Running on a lot at dusk drew every hand within earshot, and he didn't want this turning into a spectacle before anybody understood what it was. He walked fast, found Roy Caro trailer dark, and tracked him instead to the cookhouse line, where Roy was forking down beans, standing up the way he ate most nights during a run. "Roy, gate trouble. Woman says she's the state vet. Come to do the welfare check. Curtis won't let her in and won't call nobody either." Roy set the plate down so fast a bean rolled off the edge. "The state vet's not due until next month. She's due tonight, apparently, and she's been standing in that mud, going on 20 minutes telling Curtis so." Roy didn't ask a second question. He'd run circuits long enough, inherited this one from his father, who died with sawdust still in his boots, to know that veterinarian and gate and 20 minutes in the same breath from Walter Drummond was never good news on a lot like his. They crossed the yard together, Roy a half step ahead, patting his jacket pockets as he went like he was hunting for something he already half knew he'd find. Dr. Holloway was exactly where Walter had left her, dry-eyed, dignified, mud climbing past her ankles, the notebook 3 pages deeper than it had been. "Dr. Holloway?" Roy said. "Roy Caro. I own this outfit. I'm sorry, what happened here?" "I arrived at 6:11. Even now, there was no heat in it, just precision. I presented my state board credential, and the letter of routing your office should have received Tuesday. Mr. Renner declined to verify either and declined to call your office. 4 minutes later, he admitted another visitor on a business card with no verification at all. I've been standing here 28 minutes. Roy didn't ask her to repeat any of it. A woman quoting her own watch back at him that exactly wasn't exaggerating. Curtis, did you call anybody? I was about to. You had her standing in the mud 28 minutes, deciding whether you were about to. Roy went into his jacket and came out with a folded slip he'd been carrying since Tuesday and never walked down to the gate himself. Dr. A. Holloway, State Agricultural Board, unannounced welfare audit, full cooperation required, sign-off required before touring permit renews. He hadn't lost the message. He just trusted somebody else to pass it on, and the somebody else hadn't. This isn't the first time, is it? Dr. Holloway said, watching his face change. There's an entry in your gate log from last September. A federal wildlife officer. Also refused at this gate. Also black. Roy went still in a way Walter had only seen him go still twice in 22 years. Once when the big top center pole cracked mid-show. Once just now. How would you know that? Because the board keeps a record of every circuit that's had a credentialed visitor turn back at the gate, she said. Yours is the only one on this circuit's route with 2 entries. By now, hands were drifting closer. Drawn the way a lot always was by stillness instead of noise. A few roustabouts, 2 of the trapeze girls still in street clothes, Sela the young, cat trainee, broom forgotten in one hand, watching from 20 feet off with her mouth slightly open. Nobody said anything. Walter stood at Dr. Holloway's shoulder without quite deciding to, the way he'd have stood near a spooked elephant he didn't want startled further. Curtis had gone the color of old canvas. I didn't know about September. That was before me. It happened on this gate, Roy said. Under this circuit. That's mine to answer for, not yours to explain away. He turned back to Dr. Holloway, and something in his voice came apart and reassembled itself plainer, harder. Doctor, I would like you to come in, tonight, however long it takes, and I will personally walk you to every enclosure on this lot myself. That's the job, she said, and finally moved, mud sucking at her boots as she crossed through the gate Curtis had refused to open for her half an hour before. She found, over the next 3 hours, what a circuit running 3 towns behind on maintenance usually had waiting to be found. A watering line cracked at the elephant pen, a big cat's claw trims 6 weeks overdue, a backup generator for the compound's medical freezer that hadn't been load tested all season. Nothing that would have made a headline. Everything that, left alone, eventually would have. She wrote it all down in the same notebook, in the same flat, unhurried hand she'd used standing in the mud. Roy walked every step of it beside her, said little, signed where she told him to sign. By the time she closed the notebook past 10, he had already pulled Curtis off gate duty for the remainder of the run and reassigned him to equipment inventory instead, a demotion dressed politely as a reassignment, the kind every hand on the lot understood for exactly what it was the moment they heard it. By morning, there was a laminated card taped inside the gate booth in Roy's own block lettering. All credentialed visitors verified by phone call to the office before entry or denial, and no exceptions. He'd written it himself at midnight, the way a man writes something down so he won't trust himself to remember it any other way. The board's letter came back within the week. 90 days of corrective monitoring for cited deficiencies, all minor, all fixable, all due for a follow-up inspection in person. Caro Brothers kept its touring permit. The previous September's complaint, quietly closed out at the time as a misunderstanding, was reopened and entered correctly into the record. The wildlife officer's name spelled right at last, the outcome no longer smoothed over. Roy's apology went out over his own signature, not a lawyer's. I am sorry for the conduct of my employee and for the failure of my own office to see that you were treated as you were owed from the moment you arrived. It will not happen again on this lot, and I intend to see to that personally. Walter read a copy of it, because Roy showed it to him the way Roy had shown him plenty of things over 2 decades when he wanted to know whether a decision held up before he sent it out into the world. It held up. Walter told him so. What stayed with Walter longer than the letter was the 28 minutes. He kept running the number without meaning to, how short a stretch of time it actually was on a clock, and how long it had felt to watch somebody stand inside it, and how easily he could have crossed that yard 5 minutes sooner instead of waiting to be sure it was his business. He hadn't doubted her for 1 second of it. He'd simply waited, the the way he always had, for somebody else to move first. He didn't wait that long again. The next time a gate argument started anywhere on his end of the lot, a different visitor, a different season, something as small as a parking pass, Walter was already crossing the yard before anyone thought to come find him. Dr. Holloway came back twice more that season for her follow-ups, and both times she was waved through within a minute of presenting her card, both times greeted by name by whoever happened to be on the gate. She never raised the first night again. She didn't need to. The laminated card on the booth wall did the remembering for her, and so, in his own slower way, did Walter Drummond. Every single time he heard tires roll up to that gate and made sure, without being asked, that somebody actually looked.